The Curse of Renwood Theater. The Renwood Theater stood at the edge of a forgotten town. Its grandeur faded like the peeling paint on its once vibrant facade. Locals whispered that it had been abandoned after a tragic fire decades ago, but the building was eerily intact, its marquee still clinging to broken letters from a long-forgotten show. Something about the theater beckoned the curious and repelled the wise. I first heard about the Renwood Theater from my friend, Julia. She was obsessed with urban exploration and dragged me along on her adventures. "This one's different," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "They say people who go inside hear voices like the actors are still rehearsing their lines, and some even see shadows moving across the stage." Despite my unease, I agreed to go. We arrived just after midnight, armed with flashlights and a sense of daring. The theater loomed over us, its arched windows like blackened eyes. The doors creaked open with minimal effort, as though it had been waiting for someone to step inside. The smell of mildew and soot hit us immediately, and the air seemed unnaturally cold. The lobby was a time capsule. Faded posters lined the walls, advertising films from the 1940s. A grand chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling, its crystals dull and lifeless. A torn red carpet led us to the theater's double doors. I hesitated, but Julia pushed them open with an eager grin. Inside, the auditorium was massive, with row after row of rotting seats and a stage cloaked in shadows. The ornate ceiling was cracked, revealing glimpses of the night sky. Julia aimed her flashlight at the stage, and for a moment, it looked like someone was standing there. But when I blinked, the figure was gone. "Did you see that?" I whispered, clutching Julia's arm. She laughed nervously. "Probably just your imagination. This place plays tricks on your mind." She moved closer to the stage, but I stayed back, my heart pounding. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Suddenly, a soft humming filled the air. It sounded like a woman's voice singing a haunting melody. Julia froze, her flashlight shaking. "Do you hear that?" she asked. I nodded, unable to speak. The sound grew louder, echoing through the empty hall, and I could feel the vibrations in my chest. Julia, ever the thrill seeker, climbed onto the stage. "It's probably just the wind," she said, though her voice betrayed her fear. She shone her flashlight around, illuminating old props and a grand piano covered in dust. She reached for the piano's lid, but before she could open it, the humming stopped abruptly. That's when the whispers began. Faint and indistinct, they seemed to come from every direction. Julia backed away from the piano, her bravado fading. "We should go," she muttered. But the whispers grew louder, overlapping into a cacophony of voices. Julia's flashlight flickered, plunging us into near darkness. The whispers rose to a crescendo, becoming distinct words in a language I couldn't understand. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through molasses, and Julia stumbled off the stage, her face pale with terror. We bolted for the exit, but the doors slammed shut with a deafening crash. Julia yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "No, no, no!" she screamed, her voice echoing. I felt a sharp drop in temperature, and when I turned around, I saw them. The shadows. They weren't quite human, their outlines shifting and twisting like smoke. Eyes glowed faintly within the darkness, locking onto us. One stepped forward, and though it had no face, I could feel its malevolent intent. Julia froze, staring at it as tears streamed down her face. "Leave us alone," I shouted, my voice shaking. The shadows didn't falter. Instead, they spread across the walls like ink, encircling us. The humming returned, louder this time, and the melody began to twist, becoming a distorted, mocking laughter. Julia grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the side door leading backstage. To our relief, it opened, and we stumbled into a narrow hallway. The air was even colder here, and the walls were lined with cracked mirrors. I caught glimpses of movement in the reflections, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. "This way," Julia whispered, her voice barely audible. We followed the hall to a spiral staircase leading downward. It smelled of decay, but it was our only option. Each step groaned under our weight, and the deeper we descended, the darker it became. At the bottom was a small door, slightly ajar. Pushing it open, we entered a forgotten dressing room. Costumes hung from racks, and makeup sat untouched on vanities, as if waiting for their owners to return. A large mirror dominated one wall, its surface impossibly clean compared to the rest of the room. Julia stepped closer to the mirror, her reflection staring back with unnatural clarity. "Don't," I warned, but she touched the glass. It rippled like water, and before I could stop her, her reflection grinned, a wide, grotesque smile that didn't belong to her. She screamed and stumbled backward as her reflection stepped out of the mirror. It wasn't her anymore. It was something wearing her face. Its grin stretched too wide, its eyes too dark. The thing lunged at Julia, dragging her toward the mirror, which now pulsed like a living thing. I grabbed her arms, trying to pull her back, but the creature was too strong. The mirror swallowed them both, and Julia's screams faded into silence. The glass returned to its pristine state, reflecting only me now. I stumbled out of the dressing room, tears blinding me. The hallway twisted and stretched, leading me somewhere I didn't recognize. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic, and the walls seemed to close in around me. Finally, I reached another door. Desperate, I flung it open, only to find myself back in the auditorium. The shadows were waiting for me, their glowing eyes fixed on mine. They parted like a curtain, revealing the stage. There, in the center, was Julia, standing perfectly still, her face blank. "Julia?" I called out, but she didn't respond. Slowly, her head turned toward me, and her mouth twisted into the same grotesque grin as her reflection. "Stay," she said in a voice that wasn't hers. "It's your turn to perform." The shadows surged forward, pulling me toward the stage. My screams echoed through the theater, but no one was there to hear them. The last thing I saw was Julia, or what was left of her, smiling as the curtain fell.